Watch this.
When this is something that goes to the fundamental power that each of us has, why have we all forgotten it or never been told it?
I think largely that's because we've had it educated out of us. And so we were just talking about that beforehand. Why is that the case? I think there's been some fun and games going on behind the scenes because it's not good for a political power to have a citizenry that is properly aware of its constitutional powers. So,
but it is true, is it not? That it is the people. It's never Parliament that's sovereign.
Correct.
It's always it's not meant to be.
Correct.
Parliament.
Yes. As long as your constitution is based on common law, that would be described as a proper democratic constitution, not because of voting in elections. And we'll come on about that later, because that's actually adult suffrage. But the term democracy actually means something else. So there's another concealed, hidden mechanism within the constitution that's sort of been rather airbrushed out of our consciousness over a very long period of time.
And that, as I mentioned and touched on at the top of the show, it is the jury, isn't
Yes.
it? That people just think they just go in there, 12 obedient people, judge more or less tells them what to do, and there's a verdict, and that's an end of it.
Yes.
But what is the function of the jury, really?
Yeah, so the jury, I mean, we all know the first function of the jury, which is essentially to judge the accused person before the court. But the hidden, concealed second purpose of the jury, that's the key. And what that is actually to judge the justice of the piece of legislation that brought the defendant into court. So to put that another way, you're actually, as a jury, judging two things. So when the defendant comes into court, you're judging the defendant, but you're kind of weighing that and balancing it against the piece of legislation, the statute, that actually brought them into court. And the jury has the right, the independent right, to judge on the justice of that piece of legislation as well.
So the jury is not bound by that legislation?
No.
In any sense?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. So this is called jury independence. Now, I mean, they're a bit coy about this, and that's why we're not being told. It's a very concealed concept. And generally speaking, juries are not told of their power and their right to judge the justice of the law. But they are absolutely, they have the right to judge on that independently of the legislation.
So, in the last couple of years, when legislation was coming down and there was emergency powers and all of the rest of it, and we were invited to think that, well, it's an emergency and you'll just have to do what you're told.
Yes.
That wasn't the case in terms of the independence of the jury.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, simply because as soon as they shouldn't be passing legislation through Parliament, through the legislature, and there are a number of checks and balances that are meant to be in place to make sure that legislation, acts of Parliament that are proposed through bills of Parliament are meant to be checked, first in the upper house, and then, of course, through the royal prerogative. And a lot of people get a bit fussy about the royal prerogative, but they don't actually realise that that's a protection mechanism for legislation that would be contrary to the Constitution and contrary to the liberties of the people.
We are invited, aren't we, to think that the crown, the monarch, is just a figurehead. But that's not...
No.
And cannot be true.
No, they're the highest ranking public servant in the land. They're the first among equals.
And whose side are they meant to be on?
Well, they're meant to be on the people's. They're meant to be protecting the people, the people's liberties. Yeah, absolutely. That's the point of the Constitution.
And so
they are the sovereign, but they cede sovereignty to the people through that power of jury independence, trial by jury. That's how it's meant to work.
And so,
not how it's working now.
And so in terms of when what happened while we were within the European Union, how lawful was that the national final decision-making power, the sovereignty, was ceded to Brussels?
Completely unlawful, yeah, absolutely contrary to the Constitution.
I mean, is this a functioning democracy or not?
Okay, so it depends on what you mean by the term democracy, because there's been a bit of a twist in that word. And of course, we're taught, or conditioned, if you like, into thinking that the term democracy actually is all about voting in elections. It's about the majority vote, and it's not actually. That is adult suffrage. The real meaning of democracy is specifically the emplacement of a mechanism into your constitution that allows the people, through the jury, to be the final arbiter of law. And that tradition goes all the way back through early England, the English constitutional common law, prior to 1215 Magna Carta, the late Saxon kings, into Europe as well. Most of the European nations were functioning on common law as well. And then even back into the Athenian constitution in Greece.